So, in this podcast, we're going to look at Second Temple Judaism's political history. But before we do a quick kind of survey of the major kind of historical political movements, just a few words here about some of the major theological pillars that support Judaism throughout this period. So, there's going to be a lot of variety uh, amongst Jews in terms of things that they believe and some of their practices. But there does seem to be four major um, concepts that are important to most Jews. And, first of all, it has to do with monotheism. And so here we're only going to it's focused really on the worship only God. Now, monotheism can take on a lot of different um, looks amongst Jews. It's not necessarily that they believe that there is only one God. Someone can be or see themselves as being faithful to Yahweh as Israel's God and believe that there are these other gods that exist, but they should not be worshipped before Yahweh is worshipped. So, but these other gods are not like Israel's God, so that in a sense it might be more like kind of a henotheism, in that there is one God who is above all the other gods. But certainly the idea that many of the gods that non-Jews worship are not real; they don't exist at all, and that only Israel's gods does have an existence. But we'll see that there's a variety amongst Jews in terms of what kind of celestial beings also exist in the heavenly world. So there's also the idea that creation, God created and still works within the universe. So Jews did not think of God as someone who is responsible for the universe and then just kind of watches from a distance or lacks interest in it. He's not only responsible, sovereign over creation, but he is active within it. Also, the Abrahamic covenant is very central to how most Jews think of their identity. So, this agreement was initiated and defined by God, whereby he promises to bless Abraham and his offsprings, particularly the offsprings through his son Isaac and through Jacob, and then Jacob's sons, through that kind of line, and then eventually through to all the families of the earth. So the Abrahamic covenant is not just one that establishes Israel as God's unique people and the only people that God is interested in or works in, but instead that this particular people is going to live in a certain way in relationship to the God who's the creator of all. And in this relationship, as a unique kind of people, they are going to kind of model obedience to God so that others can learn from their obedience and urge them to be obedient to God under the relationships that God has with them. So it's ultimately the Abrahamic covenant is for the benefit of all of humanity, though it does specify a particular group of people to who will be blessed by God and who will serve Him. There's also Torah. So Torah, or the law, is going to get interpreted by different Jews from different perspectives. But generally speaking, Torah are these instructions that were given to those who would be in this covenant relationship with God. So Judaism is basically, first of all, a covenant faith. This is not as sometimes Judaism is described by certain people as law-based. So it's not law-based, it's covenant-based. God has this covenant relationship with them. Law observance is part of the response that Israel has to the covenant that was established by God. So these are going to be pillars of Jewish faith throughout this period, the Second Temple Jewish period, though there's going to be some nuances in how different Jews look and think about these things. So some major points then about this period. We'll begin here with the Persian period. So 539 through 331 BCE. The primary resources that help us to think about this period are books like First and Second Chronicles, Ezra and Nehemiah, the Book of Esther. Some of the Psalms come from this period. Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. So these are our biblical texts that help us get a glimpse into Jewish theological development during the time. Some of the primary political figures that we have Cyrus, Darius the First. Zerubbabel is going to become the governor of Judea. He's going to come back with Jews, um, you know, who've gotten permission from the Persians to return back to their ancestral lands, to Judea, to begin to build a community. Now, this is all, as far as the Persians are concerned, beneficial to them to have loyal colonists back in the area and who are going to build a fortified city. That's helpful militarily, strategically for Persia. So this group of people that are returning back, and it's certainly not all the people who were taken into Babylonian captivity. Many Jews continue to live on in Babylon, but a good number of them came back and established this community around Jerusalem. And kind of the governor under Persian oversight is a fellow by the name of Zerubbabel. And Joshua is a high priest during this time. Artaxerxes the first and Artaxerxes the second, also Persian rulers during this period, and Ezra and Nehemiah are individuals who lead Jews back to Jerusalem and help to kind of establish these communities who are going to be loyal to the Persians, but who are getting an opportunity to organize a kind of theocratic state within the Persian Empire. So some of the primary developments that occur during this time is the rebuilding of the temple. So that's one of the things they get to have. They had a loss of a temple under the Babylonians, and now under Persian oversight, they get to build their temple. There comes a break with a group of people known as Samaritans. So these there were people who were left in the region during the Babylonian captivity period, and who are following a Pentateuch of their own. And when Jews returned back to this area, these Judeans, so our word Jew comes from Judean, these Judeans see these other people who have a Pentateuch kind of like theirs, but also have a different kind of faith. They have different aspects of what they do that are in disagreement. And so these Judeans will not recognize the faith of the Samaritans as well as coexisting with their own. So there's this break between them. And there's going to be subsequently then a building of a Samaritan temple on Mount Gerizim. So we'll talk about that later. There's also a dissolution of mixed marriages. So under the activity of Ezra, at least what the book of Ezra is claiming that Ezra is trying to have done, is that anybody who is married to a non-Jew, those marriages should be ended, so that there should just be marriages between Jews. We also see a re-emphasis on Torah, on law and understanding of law, and we also have the development of the Aramaic language. So that really becomes the language of Jews living in Palestine in the days of Jesus. So it is a kind of formation between Hebrew and Persian influences. So Aramaic language. So some of the major dates of things that are happening. So we have 536, 537 BCE is when Cyrus allows Jews to return to Jerusalem. Around 515 BCE is when the Second Temple is completed and is dedicated. Around 445, 444, Nehemiah comes to Jerusalem. And so those are some of the major things with the Persian period. We could certainly go into a lot more details, and in your reading of Tomasino, you're going to get a lot more about the political history. The next one we'll talk about is the Hellenistic period. So Hellenistic is from 331 through 164. So the rise of Alexander the Great and his military conquest and expansion of Greek influence within the region. So our primary resources for this, well, the book of Daniel is quite helpful during this. Josephus, Jewish kind of historian, who kind of gives the antiquities of the Jews, is important. The Apocrypha, much of the Apocrypha was written during this time. Some of the pseudepigraphical material was also written during this time. And Zeno papyri. So this Zeno is someone who traveled through Palestine and made observations about life amongst Jews, and he wrote these down. And so this is in the Zeno papyri. Some of the primary political figures of the period, of course, Alexander the Great. Then, after Alexander's death, his empire is divided up amongst generals, kind of in waiting until one of his newborn son gets old enough to kind of take over, which never happens. But we have the division of his empires, and there are two particular divisions that are most significant as far as Palestine and Judaism is concerned, and that is the Ptolemies. So the Ptolemaic kingdom is going to rule over Egypt, and the Seleucid kingdom is going to rule over Syria and towards the east and into Asia Minor. So they're kind of, if you think of where the land of Israel is, then you think of Seleucid north of them, and you can think of the Ptolemies in the south. And so the land of Israel is kind of right in between them. And it is seen as an important piece of territorial property. It's kind of a buffer zone between these two empires. Later on, one of the Seleucid rulers is a fellow by the name of Antiochus IV. He's also known as Antiochus Epiphanes. And so he's going to come around and he's going to push for Hellenistic changes, programs within amongst Jews, and there's going to be a resistance from Jews to that activity. The Tobiites and the Onites are kind of family members, very influential families that are trying to exercise control within this area. And so they're pretty influential as we see political activities taking place and who can get charge of the region. Some of the primary developments that took place during the Hellenistic period, well, we get the Jews who end up moving to Alexandria. So Alexandria is in North Egypt. It ends up having a large number of Jews who will live there. We have the creation of the Septuagint, so the Greek translation of the Old Testament is a major thing. So many of our New Testament authors, when they are citing passages of Scripture, They are making use of the Septuagint. So for many Jews who speak a Greek language, the Septuagint, in a sense, is their Bible. We also have the desecration of the temple. This is during the time of Antiochus the Fourth, when he takes over the Jewish temple, and through his kind of Hellenistic programs, he turns the Jewish temple into a temple for another god. Particularly, it may be for a god who is supported by his mercenaries. He has mercenaries and military figures, military personnel, and they have a god, and he allows them to worship their god in the Jewish temple. We also have a removal of the Zadokite priesthood. Some people who are familiar with the Old Testament will know of Zadok, the priest. And so supposedly within the priesthood, the priesthood is supposed to come from a particular line of Jews. And but during this particular period, we see that people are appointed as high priest, or who become high priest, who are not from this line. And so the priesthood becomes more of a political appointee rather than some kind of hereditary right that certain individuals could claim. We also have the Hasmonean or the Maccabean period from 164 to 63 BCE. This is a very rich kind of time of lots of activities of Jewish resistance or negotiation with Hellenistic culture. So our primary resources for this, again, is Daniel. Daniel is kind of a bridge between the Hellenistic period and the Hasmonean period. Josephus, again, is an important source. Some of the Apocrypha is written here. Also, some of the pseudepigrapha, Jewish pseudepigrapha, is written. Some of the primary political figures, again, we have Antiochus IV, who's kind of this bridge between this. Mattathias is the father of this family who is going to rise up against Antiochus. This is the Hasmonean family. He's the kind of patriarch of it, and he starts the revolt against them. Judas Maccabeus, so the word Maccabean kind of comes from Judas's nickname. His nickname was Maccabeus, which means hammerer, which described the way in which he would carry out guerrilla warfare. His successes. John Hyrcanus is one of the Maccabean rulers, one of the Hasmonean rulers, who helped to expand the territory that Jews had oversight for. We see the rise of groups that are named Pharisees and Sadducees during the Hasmonean period. So we don't know of these groups' existence prior to this period, so that's important. Salome Alexander, this is the queen. She queen of who rules over Judea and the lands that have been taken during John Hyrcanus and other previous Hasmonean rulers. She's really going to be the last ruler. And this is all really, I mean, when we talk about them being rulers, they are still kind of under the Greek Empire, the Seleucid Empire. What was won by Mattathias and Judas Maccabeus, what was won was kind of a theocratic temple state. They still had to pay taxes to the Greeks, so they weren't completely independent, but they were allowed to, have their own temple and run things according to their laws, and so continue some of their distinctive religious practices. So Salome Alexander takes over as ruler after her husband, Alexander Jannaeus, dies. She has two sons, and these two sons are going to kind of throw the country into a civil war until such time that the Romans will intervene and will gain direct rule over over the territory. Antipater is an Idumean, a wealthy kind of merchant, and he is going to be someone who will broker the um, the intervention of Rome into the area to stop the civil war, and it'll be his sons who will be given appointments under the new Roman rule to administer the area. Some of the primary developments is the temple rededication. So it became desecrated under Antiochus the Fourth, Epiphanes, but under Judas Maccabeus, they get control of the temple again, and they're able to rededicate it to the worship of Yahweh. We get this kind of religious political freedom that's gained by the Hasmoneans for the area. The Qumran community, so the community that is responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls, they probably got their start during this particular time. It looks like they're the group that start the community out by the Dead Sea has some kind of connection with the priestly activities, and are disgusted or upset about things that are going on in Jerusalem, so called in the name of the priesthood. So the Mattathias and his descendants come from a priest line, but they also take on the role of high priest, which they're not really from the right line to be high priest, but they also exercise political rule, not just responsibility administration of the temple. And there looks like the community at Qumran is upset or didn't want to participate or were pushed out of what was going on in Jerusalem during this time. So also we have territorial expansion. So at first, when they come back from Persia, they have Judea, so Jerusalem and the surrounding countryside. But under John Hyrcanus and others, other territories are kind of annexed. So areas like Samaria and Galilee and Idumea and other connected areas to Judea, they get taken over, and so now Jewish rulers have authority over them. All right, and the last one that we'll look here is the Roman period, and so that's 63 BCE to 70 CE. Our primary resources again for this is Josephus, Philo, who was written during this time, the Dead Sea Scrolls, Apocrypha, some Apocrypha written during this time, some Jewish pseudepigrapha is written. Of course, the New Testament is also a primary resource we could add to this list. Now, Mishnah was not composed during this time, but Mishnah, which is these rabbinic dialogue, debates over rules and regulations, these are composed in the end of the 2nd century CE, but it may contain traditions that go back into this period, because some of the rabbis that are mentioned by name are individuals who did live during this time. Primary political figures, well, Pompey is important because he's going to be the one who's kind of responsible for coming into the land and taking over the land during the period of the Civil War. And Augustus is going to be important because he's really the first Roman ruler. So Octavian, this is Julius Caesar's adopted son. So he's important. Herod the Great, of course, is important. Herod Antipas, who rules Galilee, an important figure. Tiberius, who is ruling at the time that Jesus' ministry is occurring. Pontius Pilate, who's a procurator for Judea. Caiaphas, who is the high priest, a very significant high priest during this time. Claudius, who is Roman emperor during the time for, partly for the time around Paul's missionary activities. Nero, who's reigning in the 60s, and Vespasian, who is also kind of there at the end of the 60s, who will become emperor, who is also responsible for the siege of Jerusalem. So some major political figures to get kind of familiar with to appreciate what's kind of going on in the life of Jews. The primary development is Judea is annexed to the Roman Empire. So when the Romans come in during the Civil War period, they are going to side with one of the Hasmoneans, but from then on, the high priest is not going to also be the ruler. There's going to be a Roman ruler while there's a high priest. Herod the Great is going to rebuild the temple, or we really should say enlarge it. There's a building already there, but he's going to make a massive expansion of the temple. We have procurators, or kind of like governors, who are going to be assigned to Judea, and so Pilate is one of these. And this is because Herod's son, who was given permission to run Judea, Archelaus, he shows himself incapable of doing an effective job, and he is deposed, and a Roman administrator is going to kind of come in and administer this wealthy and important area of this part of the land, or this part of the country. We also have the temple is destroyed in 70 CE, and so that's a major event as far as Jews, and they see their relationship with God. If God permits the temple to be destroyed, that is an indictment upon the faithfulness of Jews. So that gives a sketch then of the Second Temple political history, and so I'll leave it right there.